Well, it's kind of surprising I hadn't made a video on this topic before, but sometimes it turns out it was worth waiting because you got an article that helped you explain it better than you might have otherwise. Well, hello and welcome to another episode of You and Me and Multiple Sclerosis. My name is Pam and I've been living with multiple sclerosis for almost 39 years. I've built this channel to share what I learn from all of the newsletters and YouTube videos and articles that I look at to see what's going on in the world of multiple sclerosis research and treatment, and just keep you up to date on all of the new developments, because there are lots of things going on all the time. But just because there's new stuff doesn't mean I should gloss over the basics. And when I saw this article that I'm going to be sharing with you, it made me realize that while I may have mentioned optic neuritis many times through my videos, I never really made a video focusing on it. Most of us who've had MS have had optic neuritis at least once, and for many of us, that was the first symptom we had, that at least the one that made us think we needed to go see a doctor. But a lot of the time we were not told at that point that we had MS or that it could even be a possibility. And it sometimes took many years before there would be a final diagnosis. In my case, I had optic neuritis starting 2 days after my 25th birthday. In my left eye, I woke up with it, and at first the visual field wasn't really affected, but I had pain, like I had pulled a muscle in my eye, which I thought, well, that's kind of ridiculous. If I looked up or to the left, it hurt. So I didn't do a lot of looking up or to the left. But over time, then I started to get this patch of blurry vision, foggy vision, kind of like the center of my visual field in that one eye was missing. And this got worse, and it went on, and I finally went and saw an eye doctor, and he gave me several ideas of what it could be. And he did name MS, but he assured me that, oh, it's certainly not likely to be MS. Just don't worry about it. And there wasn't much that he did, really, except put me on steroids and sent me off on my merry way. And sooner or later, a few weeks passed, and it did start to fade. But then about 14 months later, it came back in the other eye, but without the pain. And again, another 14 months later, and never again did I have the pain, but it kept coming back, almost, I think, alternating eyes. But it was the same thing with the patchy, blurry vision, and it was quite unsettling, to say the least, because I didn't know what was going on, and I didn't know if it was ever going to end. But I will tell you, it's been many years since I've had an attack of optic neuritis. It does seem to be more associated with relapsing MS than with progressive MS, but I could be wrong about that. All I know is that for me, ever since I was diagnosed with secondary progressive, and actually many years before that, I did not have any attacks of optic neuritis. So I'm kind of thinking that's a thing that's in my past. But it doesn't mean that I shouldn't share a little more about it, in case you're new to it or in case you know someone who's dealing with it, to understand not just what it is, but what's going on beneath the surface, and is there anything that can be done about it. And it just so happened that in my inbox was an MS Selfie article from Dr. Gavin Giovannoni, who goes by Professor G, talking about optic neuritis, and we're going to share that article in just a moment. I know I spend quite a bit of time talking about Professor G and his work, but the reason for that is because he has a lot to say. And while I am happy to share many of the other articles and news items that I see in my perusal of the internet, it does seem like Professor G has an awful lot to share. And actually, that is his goal in sharing. He believes that patients should be involved in managing their care, and an informed patient is going to be able to do that a lot more successfully than a patient who doesn't really know very much. We can't always expect that the doctors are going to tell us every option that we might consider, or explain things to us in the level that we would like explained. And a lot of the articles that Professor G publishes are geared toward that very thing. Well, let's not waste any more time. Let's just go ahead and look at this article together. Well, here's the article. It starts with a client question. An MS patient has a question. I have had to stop driving at night as I need help knowing how close I am to stop signs and traffic lights. Is there anything to help with these symptoms that I find quite disabling? And here is Professor G's opinion. More than half of people with established multiple sclerosis have had an episode of optic neuritis, an MS lesion in the optic nerve. Not all episodes of optic neuritis cause symptoms and can be subclinical. We can detect previous optic neuritis by doing visual evoked potentials and showing slowed neuronal conduction in one or both of the optic nerves. When assessing the retinae, we can also see asymmetric thinning of the retinal nerve fiber layer on OCT, optical coherence tomography, another test that I've had done. After a typical attack of optic neuritis, you can lose up to 20% of the nerve fibers in the optic nerve, which shows up on an MRI as a smaller nerve compared to the unaffected side. This tells us that focal inflammatory lesions are damaging and not something you want to have, which is why we try to prevent them with an anti-inflammatory DMT. And yes, I was given steroids, actually, prednisone, for most of the episodes of optic neuritis that I had. When optic neuritis recovers, the conduction speed of nerve impulses traveling through the recovered nerve rarely gets back to normal and is slower than the conduction speed in the unaffected eye. In addition, the conduction speed can change depending on fatigue or ambient temperature changes. And this brings up an interesting point. We've been talking about how in relapsing MS, when you go into remission, your symptoms are gone for a period of time and you go back to quote unquote normal. But I think the exception would have to be optic neuritis, because once you've damaged that optic nerve, it's pretty delicate and it doesn't go back to the way it was before. And the more attacks of optic neuritis you get, the more damage that you're going to sustain. I've had optic neuritis back and forth in both eyes over time, and the damage there is permanent. Even though my vision is pretty good, all things considered, the optometrist can always see the evidence of the damage that I've sustained. And just in case you've not seen this before, although I would think your doctor would have shared these images with you, Professor G, in another one of his newsletters, the one on color vision, and you can see I've linked it there, shows the difference between a healthy optic disc on the top and then on the bottom, the optic atrophy with the pale disc. And that is something that you may have heard your optometrist talk to you about, is that when they look in your eye, if you've had optic neuritis, they can see what they call pallor. They know that the optic nerve has been damaged because of the pallor. And a lot of that has to do with the size and color of the optic disc, as you can see in those two images. And Professor G goes on to say here, the conduction in the affected by remyelinated nerves can even fail, resulting in intermittent blurring or loss of vision called Uthoff's phenomenon. Many of you are aware of this symptom, and it is not unique to the eye and can affect all neuronal symptoms, including cognition. Many patients tell me that their cognition goes off in hot weather and after they exercise. The brain is usually good at compensating for the signals coming from the eyes at different speeds, but the one thing it is poor at is adjusting for depth perception. And I will attest to that. I haven't had good depth perception for years. We have two eyes with overlapping visual fields, or binocular vision, for depth perception. This is why patients with MS with previous optic neuritis may have poor depth perception, which affects their ability to judge where, for example, a cup or glass is on the table, and as a result of this, they often spill drinks. Patients with multiple sclerosis with a history of previous optic neuritis often have difficulty playing ball sports, such as tennis, table tennis, or any sport that requires accurate depth perception. And yes, I will definitely attest to that. I was actually pretty good at table tennis there in my day, but sure can't do it now. It's just so hard to track where that ball is, and I miss it more than I get it. And I think I've mentioned before that when there's a spider on the wall, I have to get my husband to kill it, not because I'm afraid of it, but because I know I'll miss. I miss what I aim at more often than not. This short video shows how rapidly an electrical impulse passes down a normally myelinated nerve fiber. Let's take a look at the video. Well, there you go. So that's what the normal one is supposed to look like. It's a sine wave, and you can see that the peaks were pretty high, but they were pretty regular and they moved right along. Compare it to the video below, which shows you how demyelination affects axonal or nerve fiber conduction. The impulse travels down the nerve fiber very slowly, requiring a lot more energy to do so, and becomes very sensitive to energy deficits and temperature changes. This is why conduction block happens during and after exercise. Try and imagine this happening all over the brain as someone with MS, and you will appreciate why patients with MS require so much more mental energy to complete cognitive and other tasks. Clearly, the consequences of demyelination depend on the disease burden, and this is why the message of treating early and treating effectively is so important. Well, now we'll go ahead and we'll look at this video. Well, okay, well, you can quickly see there's a huge difference between this video and the former one. Look at that. The sine wave is trying its darndest to form, but it's having an awful lot of trouble. It's moving very slowly. It's not as regular or smooth. Boy, if you have a friend or family member who doesn't understand your MS, your optic neuritis, and what it's doing to your vision, maybe they'd be impressed with this video. I can't help but think it would at least help them understand that you're not being ridiculous, that your vision really is impaired. One function that seems very sensitive to this phenomenon is judging distances whilst driving at night. For example, estimating how far you are from the traffic intersection or a stop sign. Many of my patients don't like driving at night because of this. Why? The brain uses a process called parallax to compensate for the loss of depth perception. In other words, the brain uses the relative size of familiar objects to help judge how far something is away from you in the distance. By using parallax, somebody who is blind in one eye can judge depth and distance relatively well. However, at night or in the dark, when images are not well illuminated and color vision drops, judgment by parallax fails and depth perception deteriorates. I appreciate Professor G's explanation of that. I knew that it was happening, but now I know why. I would like to know if you have problems with depth perception and driving at night. If you do, the chances are that you have had optic neuritis in the past. Unfortunately, we can do little to treat this phenomenon, but knowing about and understanding why it occurs may help you compensate for this impairment, disability, or handicap. From a theoretical perspective, famotidine, which is prescribed to patients with MS to improve walking speed, should help with these visual phenomena. I actually have not really heard of that here in the States. I could ask my neurologist about it, but it isn't something that I had heard of. So I've done a quick search and I got the Multiple Sclerosis Trust website, and that is out of the UK. So that helps me understand why it's referred to as famotidine or Fampira, whereas in the United States, as you see here, it's referred to as Ampura or dalfampridine. And they say that famotidine is a drug that has been shown to improve walking speed for some adults with multiple sclerosis. It has been approved by the National Health Service in Wales and Scotland for the improvement of walking in adults with MS who have an EDSS between 4 and 7. It is not currently available in the NHS in England or in Northern Ireland. So there you go. That's what he's talking about when he refers to famotidine. If you're in the United States, he's talking about Ampura. But I do find that interesting because, yeah, Ampura, to my understanding, is used to assist in people's ability to walk. But I didn't ever hear of using it for what he's talking about. But as he says here, you can't get it through the NHS in England, which is where he is. He says that many patients with MS on famotidine report that it helps their other MS-related symptoms, including cognition and fatigue. So that might be worth talking to your doctor about next time you're there. And he says if you have any personal anecdotes about famotidine improving other symptoms, particularly visual symptoms, we would like to hear them. So if you are not already subscribed to this newsletter, you might want to. And as you see here, he's got some other related articles. And the site has lots of stuff on it. He has something talking about parallax down here too. His site is really, really good and useful, and he's building more onto it all the time. His goal is to help patients be more informed so that their conversations with their neurologists can be kind of at a higher level. Sometimes we go into a doctor and if we don't know anything about their field of study and the condition that we've gone in to ask about, we might just have to take their word for it and not know what questions to ask, or even the different options that are available. Now, I'm not saying that doctors would deliberately not tell us these things. I won't say that. But I do think that it helps if you're already a little bit aware of your options and aware of the condition itself and what kinds of symptoms and what kinds of causes and what's known about it, because then your conversation with your neurologist is just going to be more fruitful for you, and I think more fruitful for the neurologist as well. But I will put links to the MS Selfie so that you can sign up for it as well. I really would encourage you, if you're not already a subscriber to this newsletter, which is free, you can upgrade to paid, but you can get a lot of the information without any charge at all. And I would highly recommend it. Well, I hope that you found that interesting and that you maybe learned something. I hadn't actually ever seen those videos before. I had seen pictures of the optic nerve and the pallor on the disc, but I had not actually seen the nerve conduction videos that we watched. I think it's quite interesting, and like I said, you could share that with people just to show them that this is the difference between what you experience and what they experience. And it might be helpful. I know MS is a hard disease to explain to other people because they look at you and they don't see what's going on in your brain. They can only judge by how you behave and what you say. But so any time that you can give them some actual third-party information that will give them a better idea of what you're talking about, I think it's all to the good. Well, that's about it for today. I know this was a relatively short and focused video, but I again welcome your comments. I'd really like to know, is this something that you've been dealing with or that you have dealt with in the past? If you're in progressive MS, is this something that you deal with? I really would like to know that. But that's it, and so until I see you again in a future video, just take really, really good care of yourself and have a really good day.